You met Jeffrey Epstein once.
Yep.
Talk to me about what that's like, coming face to face with somebody of that caliber.
Well, one thing is that there is a physiological reaction. You're meeting somebody who is unholy. And, one of the most interesting things is that he was beckoning into a world that didn't seem to exist but for him as the doormat. I think that's one of the things that freaked out a lot of these rich people is that he felt rich in a movie sense, which is not something that you find among actually rich people. And if you look at Jeffrey Epstein's wealth, it was like gold beaten into gold foil so that it could cover a vast area and leave the impression of a solid gold life. But it was really probably a mid 9-figure fortune that had been used to buy islands and planes, which is not what any 9-figure person is going to do. His product was silence. People think that his product was sex. Rich people can get sex, but they can't necessarily get people to shut up afterwards. My take on it instantly was, this is not an actual human. This is a construct of someone's. Someone has created a fake human being called Jeffrey Epstein, who's a mysterious currency trading financier with crazy rules so that no one would ever invest with him. And I think that was to keep people from seeking his investment services. I mean, he's labeled disgraced financier, but nobody has a record of trading with him. I think he was constructed, like fitted with a story. Jeffrey Epstein, super genius financier, was not a thing that existed. Where did the money come from? You're going to mumble Lex Wexner? Okay, so that's what you mumble. But then, there's this missing fortune of Robert Maxwell and this fortune of Jeffrey Epstein that we can't explain. Are those the same fortune? It's like a conservation of money principle, that if you have a fortune that's missing and you have a fortune that can't be explained and they're connected by Ghislaine Maxwell, I don't know. Why is it that no hedge funds, what is it? They file form, I forget if it's 13F. There's certain forms that you have to file. Nobody's ever asked for these things. Who's his prime broker? Where has somebody gone over the prime brokerage? What are his trades? He would have to move the market if he was, doing a yard of euros or Swiss francs or who knows what, like $1 billion. That would move the market. So there's no way you can fake retroactively a hedge fund of immeasurable size that trades currencies. I don't think he was a currency trader. He told me he was a currency trader. Sometimes somebody's cover gets blown. We have a very famous, unfortunate story of Eli Cohn with the Mossad, where Eli Cohn was an Egyptian Jew who was fitted with a backstory that he was an Argentinian playboy who'd made a fortune in Argentina, but was Arabic in origin. And then he moves to Damascus and he takes out an apartment where he holds orgies and becomes the best friend of Hafez al-Assad, right? And so that's an example of a story we know. We know how the intelligence communities of the world create people who don't really exist. This was intended to be terrifying. It wasn't an accident. It was intended to be as fascinating as it could possibly be, which it was, and terrifying at the same time. And it achieved both objectives. This is some unholy story. It has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein. It has to do with whatever this thing was. We tripped over a thing. We tripped over a structure. We named the structure Jeffrey Epstein. This was already going wrong in the early 2000s. You see, my sense of this is that this was a pre-internet plan that lived into the internet age and couldn't survive contact with the internet age. There's a claim that nobody cares about Jeffrey Epstein because it's this many years later and we've all moved on. Yeah, that's completely untrue. And we know that it's true because if you start talking about Jeffrey Epstein, the engagement goes up. So you have these fictions that are put out by mainstream media or traditional news desks, which is, and nobody cares about that story. Well, that you can see from social media that that's not true, from the internet. So the internet is constantly providing an ability to check whether or not these claims from inside the structure are true. And Jeffrey Epstein is an example of what I called an anti-interesting phenomenon. I don't understand why we're so focused on this man. Something that would normally be fascinating. The story is anti-interesting, and it's very different than being uninteresting. Why aren't we focused on whatever created him? I don't understand why we're so focused on this man. Like, this is really weird. We can't think. Take half of all the time you spend thinking about Jeffrey Epstein, talking about Jeffrey Epstein, everybody talking about it, and spend half of that time saying, what do we think about whoever was behind Jeffrey Epstein? Whatever was behind Jeffrey Epstein is what I think cared about gravity, cared about space-time, cared about physics. He was interested in physics. Jeffrey Epstein, whatever he represented, cared about physics. Imagine, for example, you had a story where you could get a Pulitzer Prize for breaking it. Everybody cares. You sell papers like hotcakes, blah, 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 and nobody wants to report on it. And it's like right there. You could just ask the dumbest questions and it would, like, New York Times says, disgraced financier. Well, tell me, did you find his prime broker? Did you find the forms? Did you go to his offices in Villard House? No, nobody does, ever. You know, there's a claim that nobody cares about Jeffrey Epstein because it's this many years later and we've all moved on. Yeah, that's completely untrue.
Which would suggest more collusion, more coordination.
Hello? I mean, see, this is one of the most uncomfortable things. I think there was a time when people said collusion or coordination, the presumption was, well, that's pretty far out there. We now know, like post Elon Musk's $44 billion adventure at Twitter, that there are these coordinating groups, coordinating social media with the intelligence community or with the Department of Homeland Security or with the State Department. We now know that we're living in an orchestrated, curated, choreographed world. And we can't know it officially, but we all know it if we want to know it.
You were born into a world that was already going, and the way the world was going could be accurately described as a hell realm. You were born in hell. You know, people think that hell is where you go when you die. Well, they say that heaven on earth, you know, the teachings say that heaven and hell both exist together on earth. Whether you're experiencing one or the other depends on your consciousness. Depends on how awake you are. If you're asleep and if your conditioning is running the show, then your life is a suffering life. Your life is a struggling life. Your life is a coping life. Your life is a difficult life, and then you die. If you understand what the truth is, motivation to practice meditation is natural because you want to be awake. You want to experience the heaven on earth, not the hell on earth. And in order to do that, you have to wake up and you have to come out of the dream. You have to come out of the thought process and you have to come out of the conditioning that you inherited when you were born in this world and start to see things as they actually are. And the truth is, the way things actually are is that, and don't worry about whether what I'm about to say is something that makes sense to you or you believe or you don't believe. You know, if you don't believe it, don't worry about it. Nonetheless, it is the truth. The truth is that you and I are not separate from one another. We're not different from one another. We're exactly the same. The awareness that you are and I am is literally exactly the same. Therefore, I can say I am you and you are me, and that would be correct. And that's why you hear things like treat your neighbor as you would have them treat yourself, because they are you. That's the truth. So that's one of the truths. The other truth is you're not who you think you are, right? We have learned to be who we think we are, and who we think we are is a physical body and a personality that has a name and has a story and all the rest of it, you know, and that's who we get up in the morning and be all day, is the personality with the body. And we're living using our conditioning to try and make life work. It's very important for you to stop and take inventory and realize that up until now, as much as you have tried to use the conditioning, to use the education, as much as you have tried to cope with life, struggle with life, change life, improve life, it hasn't worked out very well. And the reason that that's the case, and the reason there's still a lot of suffering going on, is because you're still living in a conditioned state that is unrealistic and is not consistent with the way things actually are.
We now know that we're living in an orchestrated, curated, choreographed world. And we can't know it officially, but we all know it if we want to know it.
What you'll discover through the practice of meditation is that in order to live, you have to die. In order to live, you have to die. What does that mean? It means that you have to let what's not alive be dead. The personality that you consider yourself to be is nothing other than a thought activity. It doesn't exist anywhere. There is no such thing as a you or a me personality. We believe there is, right? We maintain ourselves as if there is on Facebook. We believe there is, we believe our story. We believe that we are a personality, right? We're trying to improve that personality. We're trying to impress with that personality. We're trying to live with that personality and go to sleep at night. The reality of it is the personality is not real. In the ancient teachings, they call this the teachings of no self. It's considered to be the most important teaching there is, the teaching of no self. To discover that the personality is nothing but a thought activity. If I ask you who you are, you have no alternative but to tell me what you think. Isn't that true? Yep. That's the only way you can answer the question, is to tell me what you think. Therefore, you are who you think you are. The problem with that is, other than thinking that, it doesn't exist. It simply doesn't exist. This is a very important discovery to make, right? And if you discover that the personality that you've been trying to be all your life is actually not in existence, actually not real, it only exists in a thought activity, if you discover that to be the case, right, then that personality dies. Because you thought it was real and you were trying to live your life as that, and then you discover it's not actually real, and so what you thought was real isn't real anymore. That means it's dead, it dies, and then when it dies, the real you shows up. The real you shows up. The real you is the awareness that's been on the back burner. The real you is the awareness that's been in the background all along, but you, like most of humanity, has been busy thinking about life and being a personality, using your conditioning, trying to interact with what you consider to be the world, trying to interact with who you consider to be other people, and suffering. And suffering. And it's going to continue to be suffering, because you can't have something work when the reality of it is not real. You can't have your personality succeed in being in the world when it doesn't actually exist. Right? So you begin through meditation. See, when we're moving attention from the thought activity to the body breathing, you're moving your attention away from the process that says you're a personality. You're moving your attention away from the process that's telling you a story about the world, telling you how the world is, telling you how you are and other people are. It's telling you that all the time. It's your conditioning using a voice in your head to run the operation. And if you think that's you, you are being subjected to a mechanical, automated, highly conditioned, fear-based, highly confused system that's running the show. And when you practice meditation, the possibility starts to come into existence for you to wake up and discover who you really are other than that. And when you discover that you really are the awareness, not the thought process and the personality, you can then start to use that as a way of living your life. Start to pay attention and see things as they really are, so that you can start to have a life that works, start to have a life that you can enjoy, start to have a life in which there's peace, functionality, and happiness. So it's not something that's going to happen overnight. It takes time, it takes a commitment, it takes a conviction, it takes practicing every single day to gradually come out of the condition that most of us find ourselves in. And so in order to do that, in order to establish a meditation practice, right, you're going to have to deal with your mind. You're going to have to deal with your mind. You're going to have to deal with the voice in your head, and you're going to have to turn the situation around. The voice, you're going to have to turn that situation around so that that voice starts working for you instead of having you work for it. You're going to have to turn the situation around so you stop listening to what the voice says, but instead paying attention to what the voice is saying, and then looking to see, is that a match for what's actually going on? And if you start practicing that, you'll start seeing it's not a match for a lot of what's going on. And that explains why a lot of the behavior that comes from believing those thoughts doesn't work. So it's going to take time, it's going to take practice, it's going to take a teacher, it's going to take guidance, it's going to take a commitment. And most people will fail this. Most people will fail this because in the beginning, it's a new thing and people get excited about it, and then it's like everything else. As soon as that initial honeymoon is over, then it just falls into like something that I don't feel like doing anymore. So you have to understand that that's going to happen. And by the way, if you're new to meditation, right, and you came here and you sat for the period of time that we did, and you concluded, I don't want to do this. This wasn't comfortable. My thought process was racing the whole time. I was restless the whole time. Why would anybody practice this, right? Well, that's a typical experience for somebody that's new at meditation. But I can tell you that's not meditation. You're just trying to do it in the beginning, that's all. And that's why it's uncomfortable and restless. But you have to stick that out. You have to go through that initial phase, and you have to keep getting the support necessary, and you have to keep studying the teachings. It's even more important in the beginning to study the teachings because that's where you need the most motivation to get through that initial period of trying to meditate and being uncomfortable. I can tell you that's not meditation. If you stay with it, you'll gradually start to have a direct appreciation of what you're practicing. And the experience of practicing meditation will start to become different, right? The experience of meditation, once you get further down the road and the body starts responding to relaxing and the mind starts to calm down, when you sit down to meditate, you'll find that you go into a very peaceful, relaxed, positive state in which you're resetting your mind. You're changing your brain when you practice meditation. If you want to read a book about that, Science of the Neuroscience of Meditation, it's a book called Altered Traits by Dr. Richie Davidson. Talks about all the research that was done on monks, researched using scans to scan their brain, and the research showed that their brains were very different from people who didn't meditate. The structure of the brain and the process of the brain. So if you're somebody that needs the science to be motivated, read that book. That'll motivate you. But you do need to come to an understanding about how all this works so that you can stick with it over time. And when you do that, there are people who have been coming to this class for years now, and they have reported to me that because they stuck with it and continued to practice and refine the practice and deepen their understanding of the practice, it has changed their life. It has changed their experience of who they are. It's changed their experience of the world. It's changed their experience of the relationships. So it's proven itself to work.
Which would suggest more collusion, more coordination.
Hello? I mean, see, this is one of the most uncomfortable things. I think there was a time when people said collusion or coordination, the presumption was, well, that's pretty far out there. We now know, like post Elon Musk's $44 billion adventure at Twitter, that there are these coordinating groups, coordinating social media with the intelligence community or with the Department of Homeland Security or with the State Department. We now know that we're living in an orchestrated, curated, choreographed world. And we can't know it officially, but we all know it if we want to know it.